England can't produce timber. England can't do this or this or this or this, and the things that England couldn't do, the colonial possession should do. And then England should get, and that usually meant raw materials, producing raw materials that would be sent to England for processing. And then those materials would be sold back to the colonies and then to the world. Now, typically mercantilism impoverishes the colonies and enriches the mother country. Right? That's why people don't want to be colonies. I mean, typically, you know, mercantilism makes the mother country wealthier at the expense of the colonies. Because the colonies have to sell certain things to the mother country, and they have to buy certain things for the mother country. In both cases, what they sell becomes cheaper. You know, what they're selling at a lower price and buying at a higher price. And so England is richer, they're poor. That's why people don't like mercantilism. Now, mercantilism, the mercantilistic ideology, was put into effect with a series of laws that were passed beginning in the 1660s that were collectively known as the Navigation Acts. So what did the Navigation Acts do? The Navigation Acts implemented mercantilism. And you know, we didn't even mention them in class, but you kids read extensively about it in your textbook. But what we said is, look, the Navigation Acts created a list of enumerated products. These were things that you know, the colonists were not allowed to sell to anybody but England, right? They were only allowed to buy and ship, and there was various regulations on what they could do as a part of the Navigation Acts, which enforced mercantilism. Now, what we said was this. We said, look, the Navigation Acts were passed in the 1660s. Eventually, colonial Americans don't like the Navigation Acts and the implications of mercantilism, and they revolt. But that's not until the 1760s, over 100 years later. Why did they endure the Navigation Acts so long? Go ahead, Amelia. Oh, we love salutary neglect, do we not? We love salutary neglect because Mr. Whelan loves it so much. And today he had a nice practice with you kids, and you know, it's going to be a nice ceremony on Thursday, and that's if he doesn't just totally flip out during the entire thing and I have to come up. Just call me. I'll give you the home number. Just call me. I'll be laying on the couch. I'll come and get him. Take him away. Tell the parents. Nothing to see here, folks. It'll be all right. Somebody won't have lit their candle correctly. But anyways, we love salutary neglect, and we said salutary neglect was this idea that Britain passed the Navigation Acts, but didn't have the wherewithal and the will, at least initially, to enforce them. Right? To enforce them. Now, one of the reasons they didn't have the wherewithal and the will to enforce the Navigation Acts is they were busy. We're going to talk about this in a second, but I want to mention two other things before we do. And what they were busy with, dear Emery, was 4 wars with France. And so beginning as early as, let me give you a date on that, 1689, France and her allies and England and her allies are going to fight 4 wars. So, you know, the Navigation Acts are passed in the 1660s. And, you know, there's some initial consternation about some of the things, but eventually that consternation gives way to British indifference, because the British are caught up in these 4 titanic global struggles with France, and during that time, colonial America is going to sort of ignore the Navigation Acts that they don't like and follow the ones that they do like. And by the time England gets around, to vigorously enforcing them, or attempting to vigorously enforce them, colonial Americans are going to sort of take on their own economic, political, social, cultural identity, right? And they're going to see Britain's attempts to enforce the Navigation Acts as sort of restriction in their traditional civil liberties and their rights and their economic opportunities. And England is just going to see it as part of, you know, their obligations as a part of the British Empire. But before we talk about that, 2 other commonalities, 2 other things that I wanted to mention in conjunction with colonial America. Two other movements. One was the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is a big deal. The Enlightenment is a big deal. If you were to summarize it, if you were to summarize the Enlightenment, if I would say the Enlightenment was this over this, what would you say? Go ahead, Jim.
More like science over religion.
Science over religion is good, but I would even go more generically. Go ahead, Richards. Right, reason over religion, because it is two R's. You know, reason over religion. And the words that we associate with the Enlightenment are rationality, reason, science, this idea that human beings can understand and manipulate the universe for good. Right? So the enlightened thinkers came along and said, look, not everything that occurs is sort of the either arbitrary discretion or purposeful discretion of God. Not every hurricane is a punishment. Not every earthquake is a punishment. Not everything that happens from the discretion of God. There are natural laws, right? Natural laws that govern the universe. So central to the Enlightenment was Isaac Newton, who said there were natural laws. He is also central to your physics class, which you enjoy so much. Levers and pulleys and levers and figuring out problems, Emery, and that sort of thing. But natural laws that govern the solar system, that govern physics, that govern mathematics, governed, you know, sort of the scientific world, and humans could comprehend those laws and manipulate science and technology to make things better. Now, the Enlightenment also extended into human interactions. Not only could humans make things better through science, but humans could make things better through government, right? So liberalism, this idea that humans were good, is rooted in the Enlightenment, right? Humans are inherently good. That was contrary to the sort of notion of original sin and the idea that you needed to keep an eye on humans. How do you need to keep an eye on humans? With a king. Who put the king in power? God. Why? Because people can't be trusted because they're no good, right? That sort of conservative notion that was there, you know, and I mean, the Enlightenment challenges that and says, look, humans are good. And you know, science is good, and that the world can be manipulated by good, and God is not necessarily intimately involved in everything that occurs. I mean, this sort of this notion of deism that we mentioned, that Jefferson and Washington and Franklin adhered to, sort of the distant God that was the clockmaker that created the universe and now had stepped aside, permeates the Enlightenment. But I think most significantly about the Enlightenment was the Enlightenment's notions about government. And in terms of government, the central enlightened thinker was, in fact, John Locke, the British philosopher, who wrote his 2 treatises of government in the late 1680s. But Locke, like Hume, and all those people, incidentally, are on Lost, are they not, Samantha? John Locke, Hume, Rousseau, associated with, I mean, so there's, you know, you got it all going there, do you not? You got your biblical stuff, you got your enlightened stuff on Lost. Remember, at 9 p.m., I'm going on that shift to watch as I go to work. This is much easier than watching Lost. I mean, watching Lost is much more difficult. I got to work at that. This I can just pound it out. But anyways, it is true that Rousseau and Locke and Hume and others were part of this sort of enlightened notion. But the idea central to enlightened thinkers in terms of government was this, that people had certain natural rights. That's an enlightened idea. That people had certain natural rights, and that those rights were the basis of government. That God gave people rights, life, liberty, and property. And those rights were bestowed upon people by virtue of being born. You know, people were born with natural rights. Now, with that sort of idea in mind, what Locke argued is, in a state of nature, with no government, people could not protect those rights from their neighbor. Oh, Samantha, the island, You can't, I mean, you know, you